Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Sean and I'm a registered dietitian. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing heart healthy nutrition. So I will outline exactly what it means to follow a heart healthy diet. Now, this information isn't going to be good just for heart disease, but also many other chronic illnesses that people suffer from around the world. This includes things like heart disease, dementia, diabetes, stroke, and certain forms of cancer. So it's really great information if you're interested in following just a general healthy diet. Now, when we look at the nutrition literature and we look at populations around the world that have very low rates of chronic disease and heart disease, what do we find? What we find is that they eat mostly unprocessed plant foods. So here on the left side, I will write plants. Now this is going to include foods like fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes. This includes things like beans, peas, chickpeas, lentils, and last but not least, nuts and seeds. So they're eating diets that are centered around whole, unprocessed plant foods. On the other side here, we're going to write animals. This includes meat, dairy, and eggs. So what we find is, or at least what I recommend, is at least 75% of your diet should come from whole unprocessed plant foods, and less than 25% should come from animals. Now, this isn't an all or nothing, pass or fail sort of situation. The way that diets work is it's really the healthfulness of a diet is the culmination of all the different foods that we eat in a given day. And so it's sort of like a sliding scale, if you will. The more we shift this way from animals to plants, the healthier we're going to be. The fewer plants we eat and the more animals we eat, the less healthy we're going to be. So it's just where you feel comfortable on that line. But looking at the blue zones, they eat north of 75% of their foods coming from whole, unprocessed plants. Now, when we say unprocessed, what I'm referring to is anything that can be found on a farm, grown in your backyard, or found at the farmer's market. So this excludes things like chips, crackers, cookies, most breakfast cereals, a lot of white flour, white sugar, oils. These are processed foods. They're made in a manufacturing plant. You can't grow them in your backyard. So most Americans get their calories from animals and processed food. So what we're doing is we're shifting our diet towards unprocessed plants. Now, before I go over each subcategory and talk a little bit more about what that includes, let's talk about why this is the case. Why is it the case that the more plants and the less animals we eat confers protection against chronic disease? Well, the first and foremost, fiber. Plant foods are high in fiber. Fiber is a non-digestible carbohydrate. It helps bind to cholesterol in our intestines and we poop it out, effectively lowering our blood cholesterol values. It helps regulate our blood sugar by slowing our digestion. There's a whole host of benefits to having fiber, and fiber is only found in plant foods. So over here, we'll just put there's no fiber. No fiber in animal foods. Fiber helps plants stand up. Muscles helps animals stand up. So no fiber over here. Now just the opposite, there's no cholesterol. There's no cholesterol in plant foods. So So cholesterol is only found in animal foods. Now, I'm not going to go over the science behind cholesterol intake and the negative health consequences. I'm trying to keep this video pretty basic, but what we find is that there's cholesterol here in animal foods and there's no cholesterol here in plant foods. What else? There's a lot of water in plant foods. When we cook beans or rice, when we eat things like watermelon and vegetables, they're full of water. And so we end up filling up on water and fiber. These don't have any calories. On the other side, with the exception of milk, animal foods tend to be much lower in water. When we cook chicken, we cook eggs, we see steam coming up. You're actually getting rid of the water that's found in these foods. Now, as I mentioned, fiber and water don't have any calories. This means that there's much fewer calories in plant foods. And these animal foods tend to be higher in calories. We're just going to write kcals here, or calories with a capital C, same thing. So higher in calories, lower in calories. Fruits and vegetables, 100 to 300 calories a pound. Beans and whole grains, 500 to 550 calories a pound. When we look at chicken, 770 calories a pound. Meat in general, 1,000 calories a pound. Junk food is going to be closer to 2,500 calories a pound. And oils, 4,100 calories a pound. So we find that there's generally more calories in animal foods than there are in plant foods, with the exception of nuts and seeds. Those are higher in calories. So people tend to have lower BMIs or better weight maintenance when they eat more plant foods. Now, why else are they lower in calories? The other reason is because there's not a lot of fat. There's not a lot of fat in plant foods, with the exception of coconuts, palm. There's really not much fat in most fruits, vegetables, whole grains. There's fat obviously in nuts and seeds, and as I mentioned, your coconut, your palm, your avocados. But with the exception of those foods, very, very low in overall fat. You don't believe me? Take a can of beans or a bag of rice. Look at the amount of fat that's on them. It's going to be somewhere between 0 and half of a gram. On the other side of things, animal foods tend to be much higher in fat. Now, if you want to get into the specifics, there's 9 calories per gram of fat compared to 4 calories for protein and carbs. So because these foods tend to have more fat, they tend to have more calories. It's also tend to be lower in saturated fat. Saturated fat is a solid at room temperature. This is the bad fat. That's the fat that's associated with heart disease. Now again, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties and the arguments behind cholesterol and saturated fat in this video. I'm just laying out the basics. But what we see, saturated fat, what we're illustrating here is that there's things that are very important for us to consume in high amounts, things that we don't want to consume in high amounts. And as we shift towards plant foods, we're going to eat more water, more fiber, less cholesterol, less fat, less saturated fat. And that's really not an arguable point. When we incorporate more plant foods in our diet, our health improves. There's also more phytonutrients and antioxidants in plant foods. When plants are out in the sun all day, they create products called antioxidants to protect them from the UV light, the DNA damage that can occur from being out in the sun all day. Now, when we eat these foods, we're not just getting calories from them, we're actually disassembling the structures of that food, of those plants, and we're taking those antioxidants and those phytochemicals and we're incorporating them into our own immune system to help protect our own DNA from damage, protect ourselves from free radical damage, to lower our risk for things like cardiovascular disease. So these are really, really important compounds that are much higher in plant foods and confer protection. So that's why this general eating pattern really helps. We don't see that eating more cholesterol, more saturated fat, less fiber, and less calories is a better way to eat. We just don't see that in the literature. So I'm going to go ahead and erase these benefits and drawbacks, and then let's talk about the individual subcategories, what they comprise of, and the current serving sizes per day. So looking at fruits first. Fruits include things like bananas and apples and oranges, pretty self-explanatory. I recommend 3 to 4 per day. Now, if you eat 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it could be 1 per meal. For me, I like to have 2 fruits at breakfast and maybe 1 as a snack. It can be fresh. I'll also do dried fruit like dried figs. And so 3 to 4 per day is the current recommendation. For your veggies, right, could be your leafy greens, could be onions, bell peppers, mushrooms. Half of your plate at lunch and dinner. So that's what I shoot for. Half of my lunch, half of my dinner is a vegetable. Now these two categories here, fruits and veggies, that's what we call produce. So when you go to the produce section in the grocery store, it includes your fruits and your vegetables. This should make up half of your diet. So right here, I'm going to put 50%. So 50% of your diet should be unprocessed fruits and vegetables. Whole grains. This is stuff like whole wheat pasta, whole wheat bread. It could be intact grains like oatmeal, brown rice, barley, millet, sorghum, quinoa. What I'm looking for here is 3 servings per day. 3 servings per day. Now you might ask yourself, well, what's the serving? So if you're watching this on my website, SeanTheRD.com, I will have a downloadable handout which includes all of this information, the servings, as well as what's included in a serving. So 1 slice of bread or 1 cup of whole wheat pasta, whatever it may be, I will have that information for you to download. If you're watching this on another platform, you can head on over to my website and download that handout, which will go into more specifics. Legumes. This includes things like beans, peas, chickpeas, lentils. And I try and get these daily. Every day I try and have beans. And the reason for that is because these beans are the highest in fiber of any food. So they help lower your cholesterol. They help regulate your blood sugars. They provide fiber, which is good for your gut flora, your bacteria, and your intestines. So your large intestine has 90 trillion bacteria in it. And those bacteria eat the fiber that is essentially, it's a non-digestible carbohydrate. You don't digest or absorb fiber. And so that fiber goes through you intact and feeds those good gut bacteria. Dairy, definitely not dairy. We're going to say daily here. We want to have these daily. Daily, and this is going to be 3/4 cup cooked. 3/4 cup cooked is what I look for here. And then nuts and seeds, as I mentioned earlier, these are higher in fat and calories as a result. So 1/4 cup or 1 handful, so that much. And I try and get the unroasted, unsalted kind. So this right here makes up my diet. 3 to 4 fruits per day, half of my lunch and half of my dinner is a vegetable. That I have 3 whole grains. So usually I'm eating oatmeal for breakfast. For lunch or dinner, I might have whole wheat pasta or brown rice or quinoa or something like that to get my whole grains. At lunch or dinner, sometimes both, I'll have legumes, could be black beans, could be tempeh, could be tofu. And then my nuts and seeds could be a little bit of peanut butter or mixed nuts and seeds, just 1 handful. And that's what comprises up the majority of my diet. Now, over here on the animal section, as I mentioned before, we're shooting for less than 25% of your food should come from meat, dairy, and eggs. Now, I'm not going to recommend any servings of these because there's no nutrition data to support the benefits of eating animal foods. As I mentioned, this is a sliding scale. So if you go fully plant-based, as long as you're taking a B12, and most Americans, whether they eat meat or not, do need to supplement with a B12, but the more plants you eat, the healthier you're going to be. So I'm not going to recommend any intake of these foods, but if you choose to have a small part of your diet coming from these categories, this is what that should look like. So the one food you should not eat ever is what we call processed meat. Processed meat. This is stuff like ham, bologna, bacon, hot dogs, sausage. You don't want to have anything that contains nitrates, nitrites, and you don't want to have any meat that's been preserved with celery powder or celery juice. So no celery as a preservative in meat. The bacteria in meat take the celery and convert it to nitrates, which defeats the whole point. These manufacturers know that their consumers are looking for nitrite and nitrate-free products, and so they use celery juice. Celery juice naturally has some nitrates. The bacteria consume it, and so you end up having nitrates anyway in that food. And that is classified as a class 1 carcinogen for colon cancer, according to the World Health Organization. So we stay away from those foods. The other food you definitely want to stay away from, I'm putting number 1 and number 2. These are bad boys, okay? Number 2 is going to be your red meat. Red meat is anything that walks on land with 4 legs. So that includes beef. It also includes pork, venison, elk, those sorts of foods. Red meat is a probable human carcinogen according to the World Health Organization. And we know that there's a lot of research to support the increase in colon cancer risk when we consume red and processed meats. The Harvard School of Public Health also echoes this same message by saying we should avoid processed meat and limit red meat. If you're going to eat meat, have chicken or fish 3 ounces or less. So the size of the palm of your hand or a deck of cards. Now, for most people, if you're used to eating meat 2 or 3 times a day, a good piece of advice would be to have meat at either lunch or dinner and then have beans or lentils at the other meal. So that way you're only having meat once a day. And then you can work to getting rid of it altogether if that's something you're interested in. But it is a great sort of balance between following a diet around whole plant foods but still getting a little bit of meat so that you can maintain this diet long term. Dairy. Dairy is the number 1 source of saturated fat in our diet. And as I mentioned, saturated fat is strongly linked to heart disease. I'm not going to get into the research, but dairy would include things like milk and anything made from milk, so including cheese and yogurt. If you're going to have dairy, choose non-fat dairy products. Otherwise, I highly encourage people to look at dairy alternatives such as almond milk and these plant-based yogurts. Eggs. Now, the major problem here with the egg is the yolk. Okay, the yolk contains 180 milligrams of cholesterol. The current recommendation for cholesterol is under 300 per day. You really should, and for people with heart disease, it's under 200 milligrams per day. But generally speaking, you want to have as little cholesterol as possible in your diet, so as close to 0 as possible. As I mentioned earlier, there is no cholesterol in plant foods, and so your yolk already puts you almost to 200 just from one yolk. You haven't had any milk or bacon or meat or cheese. So I currently recommend 3 yolks or less per week. So 3 yolks per less per week, or should I say no more than 3 yolks per week. As I mentioned earlier, the lower, the better. So other than that, I'm pretty sure that sums up the take-home message. Now, remember, more fiber, more water, less calories, less fat, less cholesterol. And so even if some people might disagree with the research around saturated fat and cholesterol. What we find is that there's just too many benefits on this side of the whiteboard compared to this side of the whiteboard. And so when we look at general eating patterns that confer benefits for heart disease and other chronic disease risk, the more unprocessed plant foods we consume, the healthier we are going to be. I hope you got some value from this video. If you want to head on over to my website, if you're not already there, you can message me. I'm at SeanTheRD.com if you have any questions. And take a look at my Learn Presentations page for more informational videos.